He thinks I'm just a trophy wife who knows nothing about business. But what my husband doesn't realize is that I secretly own the tech firm his company desperately needs to survive. Tonight, at this dinner, while he's busy mocking my intelligence, in front of Silicon Valley's elite, I'll be closing the deal that will make his empire crumble. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The chandelier light danced off the crystal champagne flutes as waiters, gilded between tables at Lumiere, San Francisco's most exclusive restaurant. Around us, the city's tech titans and venture capitalists conversed in hushed tones, sealing deals worth millions with handshakes disguised as casual gestures. My husband, Victor Harrington, straightened his custom Italian tie as he held court, at the head of our table. I watched him from behind my practiced smile, the one I'd perfected over our 5 years of marriage. The smile that never quite reached my eyes, but that Victor never noticed. "Gentlemen," Victor's voice carried just enough to draw attention from neighboring tables. "The Artemis project is the future of quantum computing security. Once we secure the partnership with Nova Technologies, there won't be a government agency or Fortune 500 company that can afford not to work with us. Nova Technologies." I felt a flutter in my stomach at the mention of the company. If Victor only knew. "When do you expect to finalize the Nova deal?" asked Elliot Reeves, CEO of Meridian Ventures, as he swirled his bourbon. His company was considering a significant investment in Victor's firm, Harrington Solutions, contingent on the Nova partnership. Victor's grin widened as he leaned forward. "The contracts are practically signed. Their board is meeting tomorrow for the final vote, but my contacts tell me it's merely a formality." I took a small sip of my water, careful to maintain my expression. The room suddenly felt warmer. "And what happens if Nova pulls out?" asked Diana Kwan, Elliot's chief strategy officer. Her eyes, sharp behind designer frames, darted between Victor and me. Unlike my husband, Diana had always seemed to look at me with a curious intensity, as though trying to solve a puzzle. Victor laughed dismissively. "Nova won't pull out. They need us as much as we need them. Their algorithms paired with our security infrastructure will revolutionize the industry." I caught Diana's gaze lingering on me again. She'd attended one of my charity luncheons last month, though we'd spent more time discussing market volatility than fundraising goals. "Speaking of the Nova deal," Elliot gestured toward me with his glass. "What does your better half think about all this, Victor? Any insights from the home front?" All eyes turned to me. For a moment, the familiar tightness gripped my chest. The tension of maintaining two separate lives, of being Elena Harrington, devoted wife, while also being Ellie Martinez, silent founder, and majority shareholder of Nova Technologies. Before I could respond, Victor's hand landed heavily on my shoulder. His fingers dug in slightly, a subtle warning that I recognized from countless business dinners over the years. "Elena?" he chuckled, the sound hollow and condescending. "My wife has many talents, but business strategy isn't one of them. She's much more comfortable planning our charity galas and managing our social calendar. Isn't that right, darling?" The table grew uncomfortably quiet. I watched as Diana's eyebrow arched slightly, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Actually," I began, careful to keep my voice soft in the way Victor expected, "I've found the quantum encryption concepts quite fascinating. The potential applications beyond just corporate security could—" "Oh, sweetheart," Victor interrupted with an indulgent smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You've been reading those science magazines again, haven't you? Elena subscribed to some tech journals last year," he explained to the table. "She likes to try to keep up with my work. It's adorable, really." I felt a flush creeping up my neck, but maintained my composure, taking another sip of water. "I think it's commendable," Diana said, her voice cool. "More spouses should take an interest in their partner's work." Victor waved his hand dismissively. "Let's be honest. Understanding the intricacies of quantum computing security requires more than a subscription to popular science. It's taken me 20 years in the industry to grasp what we're doing at Harrington Solutions. Some things just aren't meant to be dinner conversation. He turned to Elliot, effectively removing me from the discussion. The Nova partnership will increase our market valuation by at least 60% before the quarter ends. Your investment couldn't come at a better time, Elliot. As the men began discussing projected numbers, I noticed Diana still watching me with that same thoughtful expression. She knew something wasn't quite right in the picture Victor was painting, but she couldn't quite place it. Not yet. "Excuse me," I said quietly, rising from the table. "I need to freshen up." Victor barely acknowledged my departure, already deep into explaining his company's growth projections to Elliot. As I walked away, I heard his voice carrying across the restaurant. Behind every successful man is a woman who knows not to interrupt while he's closing a deal. Am I right, gentlemen? The subsequent laughter burned in my ears as I made my way to the luxurious bathroom at the far end of the restaurant. Once inside, I locked myself in a stall and closed my eyes, taking 3 deep breaths just as my therapist had taught me. 5 years of playing the supportive, naive wife was taking its toll. When I emerged, I found Diana washing her hands at the marble sink. "Victor has quite the personality," she said, meeting my eyes in the mirror. I applied a fresh coat of lipstick before responding. "He's confident in his abilities. That's one way of putting it." Diana dried her hands slowly. "You know, I've been following Nova Technologies for a few years now. Fascinating company. Started by an anonymous founder who built it from nothing into the most innovative quantum computing firm in Silicon Valley, all while keeping their identity completely secret." My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my expression neutral. How mysterious, isn't it? Diana's eyes narrowed slightly. "The industry has its theories. Some say it's a collective of former Google engineers. Others think it might be a foreign government. But my favorite theory?" She paused, stepping closer. "My favorite theory is that it's someone hiding in plain sight, someone who has a reason to keep their identity secret." I met her gaze steadily. "Sounds like the plot of a thriller novel." Diana smiled, a knowing expression crossing her face. "The best thrillers are often based on truth, don't you think?" She handed me a business card from her purse. "If you ever want to have coffee, to discuss charity work or anything else, I'd be delighted." I took the card, tucking it into my clutch. "Thank you." As we walked back to the table together, I saw Victor gesturing dramatically. His face flushed with the excitement that always accompanied his business pitches. "The problem with women in tech," he was saying as we approached, "is that they're too emotional. Business requires cold logic, strategic thinking. My Elena here," he nodded toward me as I retook my seat, "is brilliant with our social life, but she'd be lost in a board meeting. Wouldn't you, darling?" The rage I'd suppressed for years threatened to surface. I thought of my Harvard MBA, of the 3 years I'd spent coding at night while building Nova from scratch, of the billions in valuation my company had achieved while Victor struggled to maintain relevance without the innovative technology he was now trying to acquire. But I swallowed it down, just as I had countless times before. "I suppose some of us are just better suited for different roles," I replied, keeping my tone light. Victor beamed at me approvingly. "Exactly. Elena knows her strengths. She doesn't try to be something she's not." He raised his glass in my direction. "To know our place in the world." As the others reluctantly joined the toast, I felt my phone vibrate in my purse. I discreetly checked the screen to find a message from Raj, my COO at Nova. "Board meeting moved. Up to 9 a.m. tomorrow. Unanimous decision to proceed with the Meridian partnership instead of Harrington. Do you want to share the news with Victor yourself, or should we send the formal rejection in the morning?" I glanced up at my husband, still holding forth about his company's brilliant future. A future that was about to disintegrate. "Tomorrow morning, Victor would learn that Nova Technologies had rejected his partnership proposal in favor of a deal with Meridian Ventures, Elliot's company. The same Elliot who was sitting across from us, unaware that his investment in Harrington Solutions was about to become much more valuable than Victor's failing company. And within a week, when the dust settled, Victor would discover something even more devastating. That Nova Technologies, the company he'd just been rejected by, the company that had chosen his competitor instead, the company whose technology represented his last hope for relevance in the industry, was majority owned by his wife, the woman he'd spent years dismissing as just a wife. I typed a quick response to Raj. "I'll handle it. Proceed as planned with Meridian. And schedule the press conference for Friday." Victor caught me putting my phone away and frowned slightly. "Everything okay, darling? Not the caterers again, I hope?" I gave him my most placating smile. "Nothing important. Just confirming some details for the charity auction next month." He patted my hand condescendingly. "See, gentlemen? While we worry about running the world, our wives make sure we have somewhere beautiful to come home to." He winked at Elliot. "That's the natural order of things, isn't it?" "Actually," Diana interjected, her voice cool, "my wife runs a highly successful cybersecurity firm. I find her business insights invaluable." The table fell awkwardly silent. Victor's smile tightened, but he recovered quickly. "Well, different strokes and all that. But in our household, we found that traditional roles work best. Elena manages our social life brilliantly, and I handle the business decisions." He raised his glass again. "To complementary partnerships in all their forms." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. As the evening continued, Victor grew increasingly animated, ordering another round of expensive bourbon and regaling the table with tales of his business prowess. I watched him carefully, memorizing every dismissive gesture, every condescending smile. Tomorrow, his empire would begin to crumble, and I wanted to remember exactly how he looked at the height of his arrogance. "You know what really makes a business leader?" Victor asked no one in particular, his words slightly slurred from the alcohol. "The ability to recognize talent, to see potential. Take Elena here." He gestured toward me with his glass, nearly spilling the contents. "When I met her, she was a shy graduate with dreams of starting some little tech blog or something, wasn't it, dear?" I maintained my smile, though my jaw ached from the effort. "Something like that." "Exactly," Victor laughed. "And I saw she had other talents. Social graces, style, the perfect hostess. So I guided her toward what she was truly good at. That's leadership. Seeing where people belong and helping them find their place." Diana caught my eye across the table, her expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning understanding. "And what if Elena had wanted to pursue her original interests?" she asked, her tone deliberately casual. Victor waved his hand dismissively. "Trust me, she's much happier this way." "Aren't you, darling? No stress of the business world. No having to keep up with technological advancements. Just planning parties and looking beautiful on my arm." He turned to Elliot. "Women like Elena aren't built for the cutthroat world of tech. They're too—" He searched for the word. "Delicate." I felt my phone vibrate again and checked it. Under the table. Another message from Raj press release drafted for Friday. Nova Technologies reveals founder's identity and announces major expansion. Attached for your approval. I quickly reviewed the document, which detailed how Elena Ellie Martinez Harrington had founded Nova Technologies 6 years ago while maintaining her anonymity to ensure the company was judged on its technological merits rather than its founder's gender or connections. The release included quotes from industry leaders praising Nova's revolutionary approach to quantum encryption and my vision in building the company from scratch. It also mentioned, almost as an aside, that Nova had rejected a partnership with Harrington Solutions, instead choosing to work with Meridian Ventures on what industry analysts were already calling a game-changing alliance. As I approved the press release, I heard Victor's voice cut through my thoughts. Elena's greatest strength is knowing her limitations. She's never tried to be something she's not, like one of those women who think they can compete in a man's world. "And what about the founder of Nova Technologies?" Diana asked innocently. "Word is, it might be a woman." Victor snorted derisively. "Please, that's just a rumor the company encourages for PR purposes. There's no way a woman built that level of technological innovation. My money's on it being a collective of male engineers who thought the mystery angle would be good marketing." I tucked my phone away and reached for my water glass, using the moment to compose myself. 5 years of hiding, of enduring Victor's condescension, of building my company in secret while he dismissed my intelligence at every turn. It was all about to pay off. "You seem very confident in your assessment of women's capabilities, Victor," Diana observed, her voice edged with steel. "Not just my assessment," Victor replied, oblivious to the thinning ice beneath him. "It's reality. Look, around this room, how many female tech CEOs do you see? There's a reason for that. The female mind is simply better suited to certain types of work, and hardcore tech innovation isn't one of them." I caught Elliot shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Even he, traditional as he was, recognized that Victor had crossed a line. "To successful partnerships," I said suddenly, raising my glass and effectively cutting off whatever response Diana had been about to deliver. "May we all find the right allies in business and in life?" Victor beamed at me, misinterpreting my toast as support. "See? Elena understands. To successful partnerships." As the dinner finally wound down, Victor was too intoxicated to drive. Took the keys to his Aston Martin, helping him into the passenger seat as he continued to mumble about the Nova deal being in the bag. "You're such a good wife," he slurred, patting my hand as I navigated through San Francisco's steep streets, toward our Pacific Heights mansion. "Don't know what I'd do without you." "I imagine you're about to find out," I whispered. But he was already dozing against the window, oblivious to my words, just as he'd been oblivious to who I really was for all these years. Instead of heading directly home, I made a detour to a nondescript office building in the south of Market. The security guard nodded in recognition as I pulled into my reserved parking space, the one with EM discreetly stenciled on the pavement. "He's still sleeping?" the guard asked, glancing at Victor's slumped form. "Like a baby," I confirmed. "I'll just be a few minutes, Carl. Need to sign some papers for tomorrow." "Of course, Ms. Martinez. The team is waiting upstairs." Victor didn't stir as I left him in the car. In the elevator, I removed my diamond earrings and wedding ring, tucking them into my purse. By the time the doors opened on the 32nd floor, I had transformed from Elena Harrington, trophy wife, into Ellie Martinez. Tech CEO Raj was waiting in the conference room along with Diana Kwan and our legal team. "Everything set for tomorrow?" I asked, taking my place at the head of the table. Raj nodded, sliding a folder toward me. "The board's unanimous vote is just a formality. Meridian's investment is secured, and the announcement is scheduled for 10 a.m. I turned to Diana. "And Elliot doesn't suspect?" She smiled, shaking her head. "He has no idea you're Nova's founder. He's fully prepared to invest in Meridian's partnership with Nova while withdrawing from Harrington Solutions once the news breaks." "And Victor?" Raj asked cautiously. "How will he take the revelation?" I signed the final authorization forms, thinking of my husband slumped in the car below, dreaming of successes that would never materialize. "Victor has spent 5 years telling everyone I'm just a wife," I said, closing the folder with finality. "Tomorrow, he'll learn exactly what this wife is capable of." As I returned to the car, I glanced at my watch. In less than 12 hours, Victor's carefully constructed world would begin to unravel. And in 5 days, when my identity as Nova's founder was revealed, it would collapse entirely. Victor stirred as I slid back into the driver's seat. "Where are we?" he mumbled groggily. "Just making a quick stop," I said softly. "Go back to sleep, dear. Tomorrow's going to be a very big day." The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Pacific Heights mansion, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. I'd been awake for hours, watching the sunrise paint the Golden Gate Bridge in hues of orange and gold. Victor, however, was still sprawled across our bed, snoring loudly as he slept off last night's bourbon. I stood at the window, coffee in hand, reflecting on how I'd arrived at this moment, the precipice of a revelation that would forever change the careful balance of lies I'd maintained for years. 6 years ago, I wasn't Elena Harrington. I was Ellie Martinez, a brilliant but overlooked software engineer with a Harvard MBA and a revolutionary idea for quantum encryption. I'd spent 3 years developing my algorithms, working nights and weekends while maintaining my day job at a mid-level tech firm. When I finally had a working prototype, I'd taken it to several venture capital firms, only to be dismissed, overlooked, or propositioned. One particularly painful memory surfaced, sitting across from a balding VC who spent the entire pitch meeting staring at my chest rather than my presentation slides. "Look, honey," he'd said, leaning back in his leather chair. "This is all very impressive for someone like you, but quantum encryption is a big boy's game. Why don't you try something more appropriate? Maybe a shopping app or something for planning kids' birthday parties." I'd walked out of that meeting determined to succeed on my own terms. I emptied my savings account, took out a second mortgage on my small apartment, and founded Nova Technologies under a shell corporation that obscured my identity. The company name was an homage to my grandmother Novalie, who had raised me with the constant reminder that women could achieve anything men could, often while facing twice the obstacles. For the first year, Nova operated out of my apartment. I hired 2 brilliant engineers who didn't care that their boss was a woman. They only cared about the elegance of the code and the vision behind it. We worked 18-hour days, subsisting on ramen and coffee, pushing the boundaries of what was possible in quantum encryption. Then I met Victor Harrington at a tech conference in Palo Alto. I was there representing Nova anonymously. We had a small booth staffed by my engineers while I circulated the floor, gathering intelligence and making connections without revealing my association with the company. Victor was the keynote speaker, the golden boy of traditional cybersecurity, handsome and charismatic. His speech was technically impressive, but conceptually outdated. During the Q&A session, I couldn't resist challenging his assumptions about encryption protocols. Standing at the audience microphone, I systematically dismantled his arguments, suggesting alternatives that, unbeknownst to him, were based on Nova's proprietary technology. Instead of being offended, Victor had been intrigued. He found me at the reception afterward. "That was quite a takedown," he'd said, handing me a glass of champagne. "You know your stuff. Who do you work for?" I'd given him my practiced answer. "I'm between positions right now, just keeping my options open." Victor's eyes had gleamed with what I'd mistaken for admiration, but later recognized as calculating interest. "Someone with your knowledge of security protocols would be an asset to Harrington Solutions. We should talk." Over dinner that night, Victor had offered me a job as a junior analyst at his company. The position was insultingly beneath my qualifications, but what caught me off guard was his next statement. "Though I must admit, a woman with your looks could go far in this industry without knowing a line of code. The tech world loves to put a beautiful face on their marketing materials." I'd smiled tightly, declining the job offer, but something else had occurred to me that evening, a realization that would shape the next 5 years of my life. Victor Harrington had connections throughout Silicon Valley. He moved in circles I needed access to if Nova was going to succeed. And he clearly had no idea who I really was or what I was capable of, so I'd accepted his invitation for a second date. And a third. Victor fell hard and fast, interpreting my reserved nature as feminine mystique rather than carefully measured discretion. He found my occasional technical insights adorable rather than recognizing them as expertise. When he discovered I had an MBA from Harvard, he'd laughed and said, "What a waste of someone so beautiful." Within 6 months, he proposed. By then, Nova had secured its first major client and was gaining recognition in specialized tech circles, all while maintaining the founder's anonymity. The tech blogs were filled with speculation. Was Nova run by ex-government cryptographers? A secret think tank? A rogue genius? No one suspected it might be the quiet, elegant woman who had just become Mrs. Elena Harrington. Marriage to Victor provided the perfect cover. While he thought I was planning dinner parties and charity galas, I was building Nova into one of the most innovative companies in quantum computing. The charity events themselves became my secret networking tool. I invited key industry players under the guise of philanthropy, then used the opportunities to forge business relationships that benefited Nova. Victor never questioned why so many tech CEOs and venture capitalists were eager to attend his wife's fundraisers. His ego simply wouldn't allow him to consider that these powerful men and women might be more interested in connecting with me than supporting whatever cause I'd selected for the evening. The sound of stirring from the bedroom pulled me from my reminiscence. I checked my watch, 8:15 a.m. In less than an hour, the Nova Technologies Board would officially vote to partner with Meridian Ventures instead of Harrington Solutions. By 10 a.m., the news would break, and Victor's company stock would begin its precipitous decline. I took a deep breath, stepping into the role I'd played for 5 years. Elena Harrington, devoted wife, would comfort her husband through this professional disappointment today. Ellie Martinez, CEO, would finalize the deal. That caused it. The duality had become exhausting. My phone buzzed with a text from Raj. Board meeting starting. All present. Proceed. I typed back a single word. Yes. Elena? Victor's voice, hoarse from sleep and too much alcohol, called from the bedroom. Is there coffee? I slipped my phone into my robe pocket. Coming, I answered, pouring him a cup from the carafe I'd prepared an hour earlier. 1 sugar, no cream, just as he liked it. Victor was sitting up in bed, hair disheveled, squinting against the morning light. He took the coffee from my hands without a word of thanks. What time is it? He asked after taking a long sip. Just after 8, I replied, perching on the edge of the bed. How are you feeling? He grimaced. Like hell. Get me some aspirin. Will you? As I went to the bathroom to retrieve the pills, I heard Victor's phone ring. From the medicine cabinet, I watched his reflection in the mirror as he answered the call, his expression shifting from annoyed to alert. What do you mean the meeting's been moved up? He demanded, sitting straighter. It was scheduled for this afternoon. Who authorized that change? His face darkened. Well, find out. I need to be on that call when the Nova board votes. I returned, with the aspirin and a glass of water, my expression carefully neutral. Victor ended the call with a curse, tossing his phone onto the bedsheets. Problems? I asked mildly, handing him the pills. Nova Technologies moved their board vote on our partnership to this morning without notifying me, he snapped, swallowing. The aspirin. Damn it. If I miss that call, the whole deal could fall apart. I sat beside him, placing a comforting hand on his arm. I'm sure it will be fine. You said yesterday the deal was basically done, right? Just a formality? Victor ran, a hand through his hair, his confidence from last night notably absent. In this business, nothing's done until the contracts are signed. I need to get to the office, now. As he rushed to shower, I returned to the kitchen, checking my phone again. A new message from Raj had arrived. Vote complete. Unanimous decision. To partner with Meridian. Legal team preparing formal rejection letter to Harrington Solutions. Press release scheduled for 10 a.m. In the bathroom, I could hear Victor on the phone. his voice echoing off the marble tiles as he shouted at someone to reschedule his morning meetings. I deleted Raj's message, then opened my charity event planning app, which was actually a secure portal to Nova's internal communication system, disguised with a pink interface and flowery icons. The board meeting transcript was already available. I quickly scanned it, noting the unambiguous language. After careful consideration of both proposals, the board unanimously agrees that Meridian Ventures offers superior terms and strategic alignment with Nova's long-term goals. The Harrington Solutions proposal is hereby declined. Another message appeared from Diana. Elliot is readying his statement withdrawing investment interest in Harrington Solutions. Timing coordinated with Nova announcement. Are you sure you don't want to delay the founder reveal until next week? I considered this. The original plan was to wait until Friday to announce my identity as Nova's founder, giving the business world time to absorb the shock of the partnership rejection first. But something about that timeline felt wrong now, too calculated, too cruel. Victor needed to understand why his company was being rejected, not just that it was. Move up the founder announcement to coincide with partnership news, I typed back. 10 a.m. Everything together. Diana's response was immediate. Bold move. Are you ready for the fallout? Was I? 5 years of deception would collapse in less than 2 hours. The carefully constructed walls between Elena Harrington and Ellie Martinez would crumble. And my marriage? That would almost certainly be collateral damage. But wasn't that inevitable? Even if I'd maintained the charade, how much longer could I tolerate being just a wife in Victor's eyes? I'm ready, I confirmed. Prepare the full announcement. Victor emerged from the bathroom in his robe, his hair still wet from the shower. His face was pale with stress. The confident man from last night's dinner completely vanished. I need to get to the office immediately, he said, heading to the closet. Something feels off about this last-minute schedule change. I followed him, watching as he selected his lucky navy suit, the one he wore for important deals. Can I help? I asked, maintaining my supportive wife persona for just a little longer. No, he said sharply, then softened his tone. Sorry, I'm just stressed. This Nova deal is make or break for Harrington Solutions. If they go with a competitor... He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. We both knew Harrington Solutions had been struggling for the past 2 years, losing market share to more innovative companies like Nova Technologies. The partnership with Nova was Victor's last hope for maintaining relevance in an industry that was rapidly leaving him behind. I understand, I said softly. It's a big day. Victor paused in the middle of knotting his tie, looking at me with her surprising vulnerability. Elena, if this doesn't go well, the company could be in serious trouble. We might need to make some lifestyle adjustments. I nodded, allowing a hint of concern to creep into my expression. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together. He seemed relieved by my reaction, clearly expecting panic at the prospect of losing our wealthy lifestyle. If he'd known me at all, the real me, he would have understood that the mansion, the luxury cars, the designer wardrobe had never been what motivated me. They were just trappings of the role I'd been playing. I need to warn you, he continued, buttoning his shirt. If Harrington Solutions tanks, people will talk. The social circles you've worked so hard to cultivate, they might not be as welcoming anymore. I'm sure I'll manage, I replied, the irony of his concern almost too much to bear. Victor finished dressing and grabbed his briefcase. At the bedroom door, he paused, looking back at me still in my robe, hair loose around my shoulders. For a moment, something like genuine affection crossed his face. You're taking this better than I expected, he said. Most wives would be freaking out at the possibility of losing everything. I smiled softly. Perhaps I'm not most wives. Victor laughed, his momentary vulnerability replaced by his usual confidence. No, You're better. You know your place, and you don't try to be something you're not. I've always appreciated that about you, Elena. With that backhanded compliment, he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. I heard the front door close, followed by the sound of his car starting in the driveway. Alone at last, I moved quickly. I had less than an hour before the announcements would break, forever changing both our lives. I opened the hidden safe in my closet, the one Victor didn't know existed, and removed a thumb drive containing files I might need. Then I selected my outfit carefully, a tailored charcoal suit that I'd never worn in Victor's presence, paired with a silk blouse in Nova's signature deep blue. As I dressed, I assessed my emotions with clinical detachment. There was anticipation, certainly, and a measure of righteous satisfaction at the thought of Victor finally seeing me clearly. But there was also an unexpected undercurrent of sadness. Not for the marriage, that had been a lie from the beginning, but for the wasted years, the energy expended maintaining a false persona, the stifling of my true self. My phone rang. Diana. "It's done," she said when I answered. "The legal team delivered the rejection to Harrington Solutions 10 minutes ago. Elliot has already issued his statement withdrawing investment interest. Victor's company stock is starting to slide, and the main announcement hasn't even hit yet." I glanced at the clock. 9:35 a.m. "Where are you?" "Nova headquarters. Where else would I be for the big reveal? The press is gathering in the lobby. Are you coming in?" I considered my options. Being at Nova when the announcement broke would make a powerful statement, but it also meant I wouldn't see Victor's reaction firsthand. Save me a seat at the table, I decided. I'll be there in 20 minutes. After ending the call, I moved through our house with purpose, collecting the few personal items that truly mattered to me: my grandmother's locket, my original notebooks containing the first sketches of Nova's encryption algorithm, the flash drive with photos from my life before Victor. Everything else in this mansion belonged to Elena Harrington, the character I'd been playing. Ellie Martinez traveled light. As I was about to leave, my phone buzzed with a new message, not from Raj or Diana or anyone at Nova, but from Victor. Nova rejected our proposal. Emergency board meeting at Harrington Solutions. Don't wait until tonight. No explanation, no details. Just a curt notification that his professional world was crumbling, followed by the assumption that I wouldn't need or want to know more. I typed back, matching his brevity. "I'm sorry to hear that. Good luck with your meeting." What else could I say? That I knew exactly why Nova had rejected Harrington Solutions? That in less than 30 minutes, he would learn his wife owned the company that had just dealt a potentially fatal blow to his business? As I stepped outside to my car, not the shared luxury vehicles Victor preferred, but my own modest electric sedan registered under my maiden name, my phone began to buzz continuously. The business news alerts were starting to break. Breaking. Nova Technologies rejects partnership with Harrington Solutions. Stock plummets 30% in early trading. Meridian Ventures announces exclusive partnership with Nova Technologies. Shares surge. 15% Harrington Solutions. Faces uncertain future as major investor pulls out following Nova rejection. I silenced my phone and drove toward South of Market, where Nova's headquarters occupied an understated building with no external signage. As I navigated through the morning traffic, I reflected on the strange duality of my emotions. There was no triumph, no vindictive pleasure in Victor's downfall. Only a weary relief that the deception was finally ending. At a red light, I checked the time. 9:55 a.m. In 5 minutes, the business world would learn that the mysterious founder of Nova Technologies was Elena Harrington, or rather, Ellie Martinez. The woman Victor had dismissed as just a wife for 5 years. The light turned green, and I pressed the accelerator, heading toward a future where I no longer needed to hide who I was or what I had built. Whether Victor could survive in that, future remained to be seen. As I pulled into my reserved parking space at Nova, Raj was waiting by the entrance, tablet in hand. "Everyone's assembled upstairs," he said, falling into step beside me. "The press release is set to go out." He checked his watch. Now. On cue, my phone began buzzing again with new alerts. This time, I checked the headlines. Revealed. Nova Technologies founder identified as Elena Martinez Harrington, wife of Harrington Solutions CEO Silicon Valley, stunned as trophy wife, unveiled as quantum computing pioneer behind Nova Technologies breaking. Elena Harrington, wife of rival CEO, revealed as founder of Nova Technologies after rejecting husband's partnership proposal. As Raj and I stepped into the elevator, I took a deep breath. "How many reporters are upstairs?" "All of them," Raj replied with a slight smile. "This is the tech story of the year, possibly the decade. The mysterious founder of Nova Technologies is not only revealed to be a woman, but the wife of the CEO whose company she just rejected. It's irresistible." The elevator doors opened onto a scene of controlled chaos. The entire executive floor had been transformed into a press conference space, with cameras, lights, and dozens of journalists milling about. At the front of the room, a table was set up with microphones and Nova's logo prominently displayed. I stepped into view. A hush fell over the room, followed by a burst of camera flashes and shouted questions. Diana appeared at my side, guiding me toward the table. "Ready to show the world who Elena Harrington really is?" she whispered. I straightened my shoulders, lifting my chin with quiet determination. "No," I replied softly. "I'm ready to show them who Ellie Martinez has always been." With that, I stepped forward to face the press, leaving behind the facade of the perfect, supportive wife and embracing my true identity as a tech pioneer and CEO. The questions would be difficult, the scrutiny intense, but for the first time, in 5 years I could answer honestly without filtration or pretense. As I took my seat at the table, adjusting the microphone, a text message appeared on my phone. From Victor. "What the hell is going on? Call me immediately." I silenced the phone without responding and looked out at the sea of expectant faces before me. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady and clear. "I'm Ellie Martinez, founder and CEO of Nova Technologies. I believe we have a lot to discuss." The press conference lasted nearly 2 hours. I answered questions with a calm precision that belied the emotional storm brewing inside me. Yes, I had deliberately kept my identity secret. No, Victor had no knowledge of my role at Nova. Yes, the rejection of Harrington Solutions partnership. Proposal was based purely on business considerations, not personal vendetta. "Ms. Martinez," called out a reporter from TechCrunch, "did you ever consider that maintaining this deception might be viewed as unethical, particularly given the conflict of interest with your husband's company?" I leaned toward the microphone, meeting his gaze steadily. "I established Nova Technologies before I met Victor Harrington. The company's ownership structure and my role as founder have been properly documented with the SEC since inception. The only deception was personal, allowing my husband to believe I was something less than I am. And why maintain that deception? For 5 years?" asked a woman from Bloomberg. "Why not reveal yourself sooner?" The question hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. Why had I allowed Victor to diminish me for so long? The answer was complex, rooted in a pattern of dismissal that had begun long before last night's humiliating dinner. "When I founded Nova," I replied carefully, "I wanted the company to be judged on its technological merits, not on my gender or connections. As time passed and Nova grew successful, I observed how differently I was treated as Elena Harrington, socialite wife, versus how I might have been received as Ellie Martinez, tech CEO. That contrast became informative. What I didn't say, couldn't say in this public forum, was how Victor's constant belittling had started small and grown over time, like water dripping on stone until it carved a canyon of doubt. I couldn't explain how, after years of having my intelligence questioned and my ambitions mocked, I even had moments of wondering if the facade was becoming reality. As the press conference concluded, Diana approached with my phone. "You might want to see this," she said quietly, showing me the screen. Victor had called 27 times in the past hour. There were 43 text messages, ranging from confusion to anger to threats. The most recent simply read, "You've destroyed everything. I'm coming to Nova now. We need to talk." I handed the phone back to Diana. "Have security on alert. If he makes it past the lobby, let him up to my office. Not the conference room." "This doesn't need to be a public spectacle." Diana raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure you want to see him? After everything?" "I'm not afraid of Victor," I said, gathering my notes from the table. "And he deserves at least the courtesy of an explanation, face to face." As we walked to my office, I asked Diana to give me the full damage report. "Harrington Solutions stock is down 62% and still falling," she said, checking her tablet. "Trading was temporarily halted twice due to volatility. Their board called an emergency meeting that's happening now. 3 of their top executives have already updated their LinkedIn profiles." She glanced up at me. "It's a bloodbath, Ellie." I nodded, absorbing the information with mixed emotions. "And our stock?" "Up 24% since the announcement. The market clearly approves of both the Meridian partnership and the revelation of your identity. Your personal approval rating on industry. Sentiment trackers has spiked as well, especially among women in tech." We reached my office, a corner space with views of San Francisco Bay that I'd visited only after hours for the past 5 years. Now, for the first time, I could occupy it openly as Ellie Martinez, CEO. "Give me some time alone before Victor arrives," I told Diana. "There are some things I need to prepare." Once alone, I walked to the window, gazing out at the city where I'd built my secret empire. The afternoon sun glinted off the bay, boats cutting white paths through the blue water. From this height, everything looked ordered, peaceful, the opposite of the chaos I'd just unleashed in my personal and professional life. I opened my desk drawer and removed a small leather journal. Inside were dates, times, and quotes, a detailed record of every dismissive comment, every belittling remark, every time Victor had reduced me to just a wife over the past 5 years. I hadn't planned to keep such a log when our relationship began, but after the 3rd time he'd laughed off my attempts to discuss technology at dinner parties, I'd started documenting the pattern. Flipping through the pages, specific incidents stood out in sharp relief. March 15th, 2021. Victor invited the CEO of Artemis Tech to dinner. When I shared my thoughts on their new security protocol, Victor interrupted. "Darling, why don't you check on dessert? Graham and I need to discuss some technical matters that would only bore you." June 8th, 2022. At the Silicon Valley Awards Gala, introduced me to the keynote speaker as my beautiful wife, Elena. She used to work in tech before she found her true calling as a social coordinator. Now she leaves the complex thinking to me, then September 30, 2023, overheard him on the phone. "No, I can't make the 3 p.m. call. I promised Elena I'd attend her little charity event. You know how wives get when you prioritize business over their projects. Besides, it's not like she understands what's at stake with the Yamamoto contract." December 14th, 2024. After I suggested a potential solution to a security flaw in Harrington's new product. "That's a cute idea, sweetheart, but there's a reason you plan parties and I run a tech company. Some things are better left to those with the proper expertise." And most recently, last night at Lumiere, Elena knows her strengths. She doesn't try to be something she's not, to know our place in the world. The pattern was clear, consistent, and devastating. Each comment had been a small cut, barely noticeable in isolation. Together, they formed a deliberate pattern of diminishment, a man systematically convincing himself and others that his wife's value lay solely in her social graces and physical appearance. My intercom buzzed, pulling me from these bitter reflections. Ms. Martinez, came the security guard's voice. Mr. Harrington is in the lobby. He's insistent on seeing you. Send him up, I replied, closing the journal and returning it to the drawer. And Carl? He's still my husband. Let's treat him with respect. Yes, ma'am. I moved to the seating area of my office, choosing an armchair rather than the power position behind my desk. This conversation needed to be personal, not a business. Negotiation. 5 minutes later, there was a sharp knock at my door. Before I could respond, it flew open, and Victor stormed in, his face flushed with anger and something else. Humiliation. He stopped short at the sight of me, taking in my executive attire and the office with its sweeping views. For a moment, he seemed disoriented, as if expecting to find someone else. Someone who wasn't his wife. What the hell is this? He demanded, his voice hoarse. Some kind of elaborate joke? A revenge scheme? I gestured to the chair across from me. Please sit down, Victor. We have a lot to discuss. Discuss? He nearly shouted, remaining standing. You've decimated my company. Our stock is in free fall. The board is discussing removing me as CEO. And you want to discuss things? I met his gaze evenly. Yes, and I think you might want to hear what I have to say. Something in my tone, the quiet authority I'd never used with him before, gave him pause. After a moment, he sank into the chair, running a hand through his. Disheveled hair? How long? He asked, his voice suddenly quiet. How long have you been... this? He gestured vaguely around the office. I founded Nova 6 years ago, I replied. Before we met. Before... His eyes widened as the implication sank in. You knew who I was at that tech conference. You targeted me. I shook my head. I didn't target you, Victor. I challenged your presentation because your encryption approach was fundamentally flawed. You're the one who sought me out afterward. And let me believe you were just some tech enthusiast between positions, he said bitterly. Was any of it real? Our marriage? These past 5 years? The question caught me off guard. I'd prepared for his anger, his accusations, even potential threats. I hadn't expected him to ask about the authenticity of our relationship. Parts of it were real, I said after a moment. I admired your charisma, your confidence. I thought, perhaps we could build something meaningful together, personally and professionally. Then why the deception? Why not tell me who you really were? I reached into my desk drawer and removed the journal, placing it on the coffee table between us. Because of this. Victor stared at the small leather book. What is it? A record, I said simply. Every time you dismissed my intelligence, mocked my suggestions, or reduced me to just a wife in front of others. Every time you made it clear that you didn't believe women, particularly your wife, could possibly understand the complexities of your business world. He didn't reach for the journal. So this was some feminist crusade? Make the chauvinist husband look foolish? No, Victor. Initially, I simply kept my professional life separate because it was easier than fighting your preconceptions. Nova was still small, still finding its footing. I didn't want or need the complications that would come from revealing my role. And later? When did Nova become successful? I leaned forward, choosing my words carefully. Later, I began to see how differently people treated Elena Harrington, trophy wife, versus how they would have treated Ellie Martinez, CEO. The contrast was educational. Educational, he repeated flatly. Yes. For instance, do you remember Thomas Chen from Quantum Dynamics? At our dinner party last year, he spent 20 minutes explaining basic encryption to me, concepts I pioneered. The next morning, he called Nova to discuss a potential partnership, speaking to me as the anonymous founder with tremendous respect and technical depth. So you enjoyed making fools of everyone, not just me? I shook my head. I didn't enjoy any of it, Victor. But I observed it, and I learned from it. The tech world, your world, still treats women differently. My anonymity at Nova allowed the company's work to be judged on its merits, not dismissed because of my gender. And our marriage? Victor asked, his voice strained. Was that just a convenient cover? The question cut deeper than I wanted to admit. When we met, I was attracted. To you. I thought perhaps you saw something in me beyond physical appearance. But gradually, it became clear that you preferred the idea of a beautiful, supportive wife who knew her place, rather than a true partner. Victor's expression hardened. That's not fair. I always treated you with respect. Respect? I opened the journal and read aloud. Elena's greatest strength is knowing her limitations. She's never tried to be something she's not, like one of those women who think they can compete in a man's world. You said that just last night, Victor, to a table full of executives. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. It was the alcohol. Talking. No. I closed the journal. It was you talking, the real you, who couldn't imagine his wife might be his intellectual equal or superior. Victor stood abruptly, pacing to the window. So, this was all an elaborate scheme? Marry me. Let me believe you're content being a socialite, then destroy my company and reveal yourself as some tech genius? The rejection of Harrington Solutions' partnership proposal was a business decision, not a personal vendetta, I said, keeping my voice level. Your company's approach to quantum encryption has fallen behind the curve. Your development team hasn't produced meaningful innovation in 3 years. The partnership would have benefited Harrington far more than Nova. And you couldn't have explained that to me? He demanded, turning back to face me. Given your own husband a chance to improve his proposal? Would you have listened? I asked quietly. If I'd come to you as Elena, your wife, with suggestions about quantum encryption strategies, would you have taken me seriously? Or would you have patted my head and told me to stick to planning parties? The silence that followed was answer enough. I built Nova from nothing, I continued, working nights, weekends, pouring every cent I had into it while facing skepticism and sexism at every turn. When we met, I saw an opportunity for a personal connection with someone in my industry. Instead, I found myself trapped in a role that became increasingly suffocating. So divorce me, Victor said bitterly. Why the public humiliation? Did you have to announce your identity the same day you rejected my company's proposal? It was a fair question, and one I'd asked myself repeatedly over the past weeks as I'd planned this reveal. The timing wasn't ideal, I acknowledged. Originally, we planned to announce my identity next week, separate from the partnership decision. But after last night's dinner, after hearing you dismissing women in business yet again, I decided it was time for absolute transparency. Victor's phone buzzed in his pocket. He checked it, his face darkening further. Well, congratulations on your timing. The board just voted to remove me as CEO, effective immediately. Interim leadership will be announced this afternoon. He looked up, his expression a mixture of anger and despair. You've won, Elena, or Ellie, or whoever you really are. The victory felt hollow. Despite everything, I hadn't wanted to destroy Victor, only to free myself from the constraints he'd placed on me. This isn't about winning, I said. It's about the truth. About being able to live as my whole self, not just the parts you found acceptable. Noble sentiments from the woman who just tanked her husband's career, he retorted. What happens now? You continue building your empire while I become a cautionary tale in Silicon Valley? I stood, crossing to where he stood by the window. What happens now is up to you, Victor. You're still brilliant, still charismatic. Your downfall isn't that Nova rejected Harrington's partnership proposal. It's that you built a company so dependent on that one deal that its failure could bring everything crashing down. Don't lecture me on business strategy, he snapped. Not today. Fair enough, I conceded, stepping back. But consider this. The man I met 5 years ago was resilient, innovative. He wouldn't let one setback, even one this significant, define him. Victor looked at me with newfound wariness, as if seeing a stranger. Why would you care what happens to me now? You've made your point. The tech world is buzzing about the wife who outsmarted her condescending husband. Because despite everything, I never wanted to destroy you, Victor. I just couldn't continue living as less than who I am. He shook his head slowly. I don't even know who you are. That's the point, I said quietly. You never tried to find out. We stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of 5 years, of deception and dismissal hanging between us. Finally, Victor spoke, his voice resigned. I suppose I should call a lawyer. Probably, I agreed. But not because I'm planning to take anything from you in a divorce. Nova's success has made me wealthy in my own right. I don't need or want your assets. How magnanimous, he said bitterly. It's not magnanimity, Victor. It's practical. A drawn-out legal battle serves neither of us. His phone buzzed again. More bad news, judging by his expression as he read the message. I need to go, he said, putting the phone away. Apparently, I'm required to clear out my office by the end of the day. The board doesn't want the ousted CEO lingering and potentially interfering with the transition. The coldness of corporate politics, something I understood all too well, but had hoped might be tempered in Victor's case given his founding role at Harrington Solutions. I'm sorry it came to this, I said, and meant it. Victor paused at the door, turning back with a question that seemed to genuinely puzzle him. Was it worth it? Living a double life for 5 years just to prove you could succeed in tech without being judged for your gender? The question deserved a thoughtful answer. It wasn't about proving anything, Victor. It was about creating something valuable on my own terms. Nova's technology is changing the world. Would that work have been judged the same if people knew from the beginning it came from a woman? Based on my experiences, and your own words, probably not. He nodded slowly, absorbing this. For what it's worth, he said finally, I was wrong. About women in tech, about you. A bitter smile crossed his face. Clearly. With that, he was gone, leaving me alone in the office I could finally claim publicly as my own. The victory I'd anticipated for so long felt complicated, layered with unexpected emotions. I hadn't just revealed myself as Nova's founder. I'd shattered the foundations of my marriage and Victor's career in one seismic event. My phone buzzed with a message from Raj. Board meeting in 30 minutes to discuss transition plan, now that your identity is public. Press still camped in the lobby. How do you want to proceed? I looked out at the San Francisco skyline, thinking about the path that had led me here. The pattern of dismissal that had shaped my decisions. The quiet accumulation of small indignities that had ultimately forced this dramatic revelation. I'll be there, I replied. And Raj, make sure our HR team reaches out to some of the key technical talent at Harrington Solutions. If their company's going under, we could use good engineers who understand encryption protocols. It wasn't a complete solution to the damage I'd caused, but it was a start. A recognition that beyond Victor's dismissive attitude were real people, with families and mortgages who deserved a soft landing. As I gathered my materials for the board meeting, my gaze fell on the leather journal still sitting on the coffee table. I picked it up, weighing it in my hand, considering whether to keep this record of slights and dismissals. After a moment's hesitation, I dropped it into the shredder beside my desk. The past was documented. I didn't need to carry it forward. Whatever came next, divorce proceedings, media scrutiny, rebuilding Nova's public image with me as its visible leader, would be faced as my complete self. No more hiding. No more diminishment. No more being just a wife. The next week passed in a blur of meetings, interviews, and strategic planning sessions. With my identity as Nova's founder now public, I had to adjust to a completely new reality, one where I no longer needed to compartmentalize my life into neat, separate boxes. 7 days after the revelation, I sat in Nova's main conference room with Raj and our executive team, reviewing the company's transition plan. The wall of windows behind us offered a panoramic view of San Francisco, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the city. Public response has been overwhelmingly positive, Diana reported, swiping through analytics on her tablet, particularly among women in tech. Your story has resonated deeply with female engineers and entrepreneurs who've faced similar dismissal in their careers. Raj nodded in agreement. We've received over 300 partnership inquiries since the announcement, plus investment offers totaling more than $2 billion. He slid a folder across the table to me. And these came in this morning. Resumes from 27 Harrington Solutions engineers, including their former CTO. I flipped through the resumes, recognizing names I'd heard Victor mention over the years. Talented people who had been caught in the crossfire of our personal and professional conflict. Fast-track these for interviews, I said, closing the folder. Particularly their quantum encryption team. They have solid fundamentals, just poor leadership. Speaking of Harrington Solutions, Diana said carefully, their stock has stabilized at around 28% of its previous value. The interim CEO announced a strategic restructuring yesterday, which appears to be code for massive layoffs. I felt a twinge of guilt, quickly suppressed. Business was business. The fall of Harrington Solutions wasn't personal. It was the inevitable result of a company that had failed to innovate while growing increasingly dependent on partnerships with more cutting-edge firms like Nova. And Victor? I asked, attempting to keep my tone neutral. Diana and Raj exchanged glances before Raj answered. He's gone dark, cleaned out his office last week and hasn't been seen publicly since. His social media accounts have been deactivated. I nodded, unsurprised. Victor's pride would make this public humiliation particularly difficult to bear. In the 5 years I'd known him, he had cultivated his image as a tech visionary with meticulous care. To have that image shattered, and by his own wife, no less, would be devastating. Let's move on to the Meridian Partnership implementation, I suggested, steering the conversation back to business matters. Where do we stand with integration timelines? As the meeting continued, I found my thoughts drifting back to the strange double life I'd led for so long. Now that it was over, I could finally reflect on how I'd managed to build Nova while maintaining my cover as Victor's supportive, seemingly oblivious wife. The deception had required elaborate planning and constant vigilance. While Victor believed, I spent my days planning charity events and attending yoga classes, I was actually building one of the most innovative quantum encryption companies in the world. My charity committee meetings were often board sessions with Nova's investors. The wellness retreats I attended quarterly were actually tech conferences, where I could move freely as Ellie Martinez, my identity obscured by my maiden name, and the tech world's general disinterest in connecting people's personal and professional lives. Even my social circle had been carefully curated to support this dual existence. The women Victor dismissed as ladies who lunch included the wife of a venture capitalist who had provided Nova's seed funding, a former ethical hacker who led our security testing team, and a prominent tech journalist who had agreed to keep my secret in exchange for exclusive access once I went public. Ellie? Raj's voice broke through my reflections. Your thoughts on the revised timeline? I refocused on the matter at hand. The 4-month integration period seems reasonable, but let's build in contingencies for technical challenges. Quantum encryption isn't plug and play. The meeting concluded an hour later with action items assigned and timelines approved. As the team filed out, Diana lingered behind. There's one more thing, she said once we were alone. The profile piece. With technology today, they want to do a deep dive on how you manage to build Nova while maintaining your cover. They're particularly interested in the logistical aspects. I considered this. The how of my double life was indeed a fascinating story, one that showcased not just technical brilliance, but strategic thinking and psychological insight. Set it up, I decided. But make it clear that I won't discuss Victor's private matters or our marriage beyond what's already public knowledge. Diana nodded. Of course. She hesitated before adding, Have you heard from him at all? No, I replied simply. The truth was more complicated. Victor had moved out of our Pacific Heights mansion the day after the revelation, leaving behind most of his possessions. His lawyer had contacted mine regarding divorce proceedings, but there had been no direct communication between us. After Diana left, I remained at the conference table, gazing out at the city as twilight approached. The past week had been exhilarating in many ways. The freedom to finally integrate my personal and professional selves, the vindication of having my technological contributions recognized, the relief of no longer living a lie. But there was also a heaviness I hadn't anticipated. The end of a marriage, even one built on misconceptions, carried its own grief. And seeing the collateral damage to innocent employees at Harrington Solutions left me questioning whether my approach had been unnecessarily destructive. My phone chimed with a calendar reminder. Interview prep, 7 p.m. The technology today. Profile would require careful navigation. I wanted to share my journey authentically without appearing vindictive or calculating. As I gathered my things to head home, not to the mansion Victor and I had shared, but to the loft in Soma I'd maintained as a pied-à-terre for late nights at Nova, I found myself reflecting on the incredible journey that had led me here. 6. Years ago, I'd been working as a mid-level engineer at a cybersecurity firm, my innovations consistently overlooked or attributed to male colleagues. The quantum encryption algorithm that would eventually become Nova's foundation had been dismissed by my supervisors as theoretically interesting, but commercially impractical. Frustrated but determined, I'd devoted nights and weekends to refining the algorithm, working from my small apartment with only my cat for company. When I finally had a working prototype that demonstrably outperformed existing encryption methods, I took it to several venture capital firms. The pattern had been discouragingly consistent. Male VCs either dismissed my technical explanations, tried to explain my own algorithm back to me incorrectly, or suggested I find a male co-founder to handle the business side while I focused on coding. One particularly memorable rejection came from Gregory Palmer at Altitude Ventures, who had leaned back in his leather chair after my presentation and said, "Look, honey, this is all very impressive for someone like you, but quantum encryption is a big boy's game. Why don't you try something more appropriate? Maybe a shopping app or something for planning kids' birthday parties." That meeting had been the turning point. Walking back to my apartment in the rain, I'd made a decision that would alter the course of my life. If the tech world wouldn't take Ellie Martinez seriously, I would create a company where my gender was irrelevant. Using my savings and a small inheritance from my grandmother, I incorporated Nova Technologies with an anonymous ownership structure that obscured my identity while remaining legally sound. I rented a small office space and hired 2 brilliant engineers who had been laid off from a competitor, people who cared only about the quality of the code, not the gender of the person writing it. For the first year, Nova operated in near secrecy, developing our core technology while avoiding the spotlight. When we finally launched our first product, a quantum encryption protocol that was demonstrably more secure than anything on the market, the tech world took notice. Who was behind this breakthrough? Speculation ranged from former NSA cryptographers to a secret AI project. No one guessed it might be a woman in her early 30s working out of a converted warehouse in Soma. As Nova grew, maintaining my anonymity became more challenging. I needed to attend meetings, make strategic decisions, meet with potential clients, all while keeping my identity hidden. I developed a system of proxy representatives and secure communication channels that allowed me to run the company effectively from behind the scenes. Then I met Victor Harrington at the Palo Alto Tech Conference, and everything became more complicated. And, ironically, easier. Victor's assumption that I was between positions rather than a company founder aligned perfectly with his worldview. When he pursued me romantically, I initially hesitated, wary of entangling my personal and professional lives. But as our relationship developed, I began to see unexpected advantages in being Victor Harrington's wife. The role provided the perfect cover. No one questioned why I attended tech events or charity galas with Silicon Valley executives. No one found it strange that I maintained a busy schedule of social engagements that often coincided with Nova's board meetings. And certainly no one suspected that the quiet, elegant woman planning fundraisers was secretly revolutionizing quantum encryption. Victor's dismissive attitude toward my intelligence, initially infuriating, became perversely useful. His constant assertion that I was just a wife with no head for business created a smokescreen behind which I could operate freely. The more he diminished me publicly, the less likely anyone was to connect me with Nova's mysterious founder. Had Nina, my executive assistant at Nova, call me as I drove home. The reporters from Technology Today want some specific examples of how you managed your dual identity, she informed me. They're particularly interested in any close calls or moments when your cover was almost blown. I smiled wryly, thinking of the numerous near misses over the years. Tell them I'll share a few anecdotes, but I'm not going to provide a blueprint for deception. This isn't meant to be a how-to guide. Understood, Nina replied. Oh, and Ellie? The invitations for next month's Women in Tech Gala arrived. They want you to give the keynote address. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd attended that very gala as Victor's wife, making small talk at the periphery while he networked with the important people. Now I was being asked to headline the event. Tell them I'd be honored, I said. After ending the call, I continued the drive to my loft, the city lights blurring as I thought back to one particular close call that had nearly exposed my double life 2 years ago. It was at the annual Tech Fusion conference in Las Vegas. Victor was speaking on a panel about cybersecurity, while I had a secret meeting scheduled with potential investors for Nova in a private suite across the hotel. My cover story was a spa day at the resort. The meeting had run long, and as I hurried through the lobby to change clothes before meeting Victor for dinner, I literally collided with James Wilson, then CFO of Meridian Ventures, and a close friend of Victor's. Elena, he'd exclaimed, steadying me. I thought you were at the spa all day. Victor mentioned something about a special package. I finished early, I replied smoothly. Just heading up to change for dinner. He'd glanced at the portfolio clutched in my hand, containing Nova's confidential financial projections, with mild curiosity. Doing some reading poolside? Oh, this? I'd laughed lightly. Just some information on a charity I'm considering. For our next gala. You know how it is, always working, even on vacation. James had seemed satisfied with the explanation, but the close call had shaken me. It highlighted the increasing difficulty of maintaining my dual identities as both Nova and my marriage grew more prominent. Yet the deception had continued for 3 more years, becoming more elaborate and stressful with each passing month. By the time of that fateful dinner at Lumiere, where Victor had once again mocked my intelligence in front of Silicon Valley's elite, the strain of living a divided life had become almost unbearable. I pulled into the parking garage beneath my loft building, nodding to the security guard who now recognized me as a regular rather than an occasional visitor. For years, I'd used this space primarily to work late into the night when I claimed to be attending overnight charity retreats. Now it was becoming my actual home. One space where I could finally be my complete self. The loft was minimalist and functional, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the Bay Bridge illuminated against the night sky. Unlike the opulent mansion in Pacific Heights, decorated largely to Victor's taste, this space reflected my own aesthetic: clean lines, innovative tech, and walls lined with books on quantum physics, encryption, and computer science that I'd never dared display in our shared home. I poured myself a glass of wine and settled at my desk to prepare for the Technology Today interview. The reporter had sent a list of potential questions, many focusing on how I'd manage the practical aspects of my deception. How did you communicate with your team while maintaining your cover? Were there trusted confidants who knew your true identity? What security measures did you implement to prevent your dual identity from being discovered? Did you ever consider revealing yourself to your husband earlier? That last question gave me pause. Had I? There had been moments, particularly early in our marriage, when I'd considered sharing my secret with Victor. Moments when he'd shown glimmers of genuine interest in my thoughts, when I'd hoped he might be capable of seeing me as a true partner rather than an accessory. One such moment came after a dinner party at our home, about a year into our marriage. Victor's company had just lost a major contract to a competitor with superior encryption technology. As we readied for bed, he'd seemed unusually vulnerable, admitting he feared Harrington Solutions was falling behind the curve. "Sometimes I wonder if we're approaching security all wrong," he'd said, loosening his tie. "Maybe quantum is the future, not just a theoretical playground." It had been the perfect opening. I'd taken a breath, preparing to share my work, my company, my vision. But before I could speak, he'd continued. "Listen to me, talking shop with you at midnight, as if you'd have any interest in quantum encryption." He'd kissed my forehead dismissively. "That's what I love about you, Elena. You keep me grounded in the real world, away from all that technical jargon." And just like that, the moment had passed. The wall between Elena Harrington and Ellie Martinez had solidified further, reinforced by Victor's inability to see beyond the persona he'd assigned me. As I reviewed the reporter's questions, crafting responses that were honest without being needlessly hurtful to Victor, I realized how exhausting the past 5 years had been. The constant vigilance, the careful management of 2 separate digital identities, the strategic scheduling to ensure Elena and Ellie were never required in 2 places simultaneously. My phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. I opened it warily, then felt my breath catch as I read the message. "We need to talk." Not about the divorce, about Harrington Solutions and what's left of it. After a week of silence, Victor was reaching out. Not about our marriage, but about business. It was so characteristic of him to prioritize his company over our personal relationship that I almost laughed. I considered ignoring the message, but curiosity won out. "What about Harrington Solutions?" I typed back. His response came quickly. Not over text. "Breakfast tomorrow?" 8 a.m. at Milo's. Milo's was a small cafe in Noe Valley, neutral territory, away from both Nova's offices and our former home. The choice suggested Victor wasn't looking for a confrontation, but a conversation. "I'll be there," I replied after a moment's consideration. Setting down my phone, I turned back to the interview preparation, but my thoughts kept drifting to tomorrow's meeting. What could Victor want to discuss about his failing company? Was he seeking advice, investment, or something else entirely? More importantly, how would it feel to face him again, now that the power dynamic between us had been so dramatically reversed? For 5 years, he had been the successful tech CEO while I played the role of supportive wife. Now I stood revealed as the visionary founder he had always aspired to be, while his own company crumbled around him. The symmetry wasn't lost on me, nor was the potential for either healing or further damage in our upcoming conversation. Tomorrow would be the first time we met as equals, both professionally and personally, with no pretense between us. As I prepared for bed that night, I realized this was what I had wanted all along. Not Victor's destruction, but the opportunity to be seen clearly for who I truly was. Whether he was capable of that clear seeing remained to be seen. One thing was certain: I would never again accept being dismissed as just a wife. Those days were over, consigned to a past that seemed increasingly distant with each day I lived as my complete integrated self. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring, but I would face it as Ellie Martinez, tech CEO and quantum encryption pioneer, the woman I had always been, even when hiding in plain sight. Milo's Cafe was already bustling when I arrived at 7:55 the next morning. The small Noe Valley establishment was known for its excellent coffee and discreet atmosphere, a place where Silicon Valley's elite could have conversations without the constant interruption of selfie requests or eavesdropping. I chose a table, in the back corner with clear sightlines to both the entrance and the emergency exit, a habit developed during years of clandestine business meetings. The server, recognizing me from news coverage of the Nova revelation, did a double-take before regaining her professional composure. "Just a cappuccino for now," I told her. "I'm waiting for someone." Victor arrived precisely at 8:00 a.m. Punctuality had always been one of his virtues. He paused at the entrance, scanning the room until his gaze landed on me. For a moment he seemed uncertain, as if reconciling the Elena he had known with the Ellie now revealed to the world. The past week had taken its toll on him. His normally impeccable appearance had slipped. His designer suit looked slept in, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. As he approached my table, I noticed he'd lost weight, his cheekbones more pronounced than usual. "Thank you for coming," he said, taking the seat across from me. His voice lacked its usual confident resonance. "You said it was important," I replied neutrally. The server returned, and Victor ordered black coffee, no artisanal pour-over or specialty bean selection. Another sign of how much had changed, we sat in uncomfortable silence until our drinks arrived. Finally, Victor spoke. "I've been offered a position at Tetrasek," he said without preamble. "Advisory role, no equity. The industry equivalent of a gold watch before retirement. Tetrasek was a mid-tier security company known for conservative approaches and government contracts, precisely the kind of place Victor had always dismissed as lacking vision." "I see," I responded carefully. "And you're considering it?" He laughed, hollowly. "Considering it? Elena?" He caught himself. "Ellie, I have no options left. Harrington Solutions is being sold for parts. My reputation is in tatters. Half the tech world thinks I'm a fool, and the other half thinks I'm a sexist dinosaur who couldn't recognize brilliance in his own home." I took a sip of my cappuccino, buying time to consider my response. "Why tell me this? I assume you didn't invite me here for sympathy." "No," Victor agreed, his expression hardening slightly. "I came because before I accept Tetrasek's offer, I wanted to understand something." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "What was the breaking point? After 5 years of maintaining your cover, why reveal yourself now, this way?" The question caught me off guard. I had prepared for accusations, for bargaining about the divorce settlement, even for threats, but not for this sincere inquiry into my motivations. "Why does it matter to you?" I countered. "Because I need to know if this was always the plan," Victor replied, his eyes searching mine. "Was I just a stepping stone? A useful cover until Nova was established enough that you could emerge triumphantly? As its founder? Was any of it real?" I considered deflecting, giving some sanitized version that would end this conversation quickly, but something in his genuine bewilderment made me opt for honesty instead. "There was no master plan, Victor. When we met, Nova was just finding its footing. Maintaining my anonymity made sense from a business perspective. It allowed the company's technology to be judged on its merits alone." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "Marrying you wasn't part of some elaborate scheme. I genuinely hoped we could build something meaningful together." "Then what changed?" he pressed. I thought back to the gradual erosion of my hopes for our relationship, the accumulation of small dismissals and condescensions that had slowly extinguished any possibility of genuine partnership. "Do you remember the Yamamoto contract?" I asked. Victor frowned slightly. From last year? The Japanese conglomerate looking for security solutions? I nodded. You came home frustrated because their technical team kept finding flaws in Harrington's encryption approach. You said they were being unnecessarily difficult. They were, Victor insisted. Their demands were beyond industry standard. No, Victor. Their demands were exactly what Nova was already delivering. I knew because I'd met with their CTO the previous week. They weren't being difficult. They were comparing your outdated approach to cutting-edge solutions. Victor's expression darkened. And you didn't think to mention this. I tried. I suggested that quantum-based encryption might address their concerns. You laughed and told me to stick to planning the charity gala because quantum encryption was years away from commercial viability. Understanding dawned in his eyes, while you were already successfully implementing it at Nova. Exactly. That night, I went to the guest room after you fell asleep and cried for the first time in years. Not because you dismissed me, I was used to that, but because I realized our marriage would never be a true partnership. You didn't want a wife who could challenge you intellectually. You wanted a beautiful accessory who knew her place. Victor flinched at my words but didn't deny them. And that was the breaking point? That conversation? No, I sighed. I still held out hope that things might change. The breaking point came later, at the Women in Tech Gala 3 months ago. Recognition flickered across Victor's face as he recalled the event. One of Silicon Valley's most prestigious annual gatherings, ostensibly celebrating female contributions to the industry. I remember. You wore that blue gown. Yes. And you spent the entire evening telling everyone how supportive you were of women in tech, while simultaneously undermining me in every conversation. Victor opened his mouth to protest, but I continued. When Rebecca Chen asked about my background, you jumped in to say I'd dabbled in programming before finding my true calling as your wife. When Sanjay Mehta mentioned Nova Technologies' impressive encryption breakthroughs, you dismissed them as more theoretical than practical, while I stood silently beside you, knowing I had written the core algorithms myself. I leaned forward, the memory still raw. But the true breaking point came during your speech. Do you remember what you said while accepting that Male Ally Award? Victor's gaze dropped to his coffee cup. Not exactly. You said, and I quote, "The tech world needs women. Their unique perspective brings valuable diversity to our industry. My wife Elena may not code or build products, but her emotional intelligence and social skills make our home run as efficiently as any Silicon Valley startup." The cafe had grown quieter, a few nearby patrons clearly eavesdropping despite their pretense of absorption in their phones or laptops. I didn't mean, Victor began. It doesn't matter what you meant, I interrupted. What matters is that in that moment, standing in a room full of brilliant female engineers, founders, and VCs, you reduced my value to emotional intelligence and social skills. You made me the poster child for what women supposedly bring to the table, not technical brilliance or business acumen, but glorified household management. Victor was silent for a long moment, and that night, you decided to reveal yourself as Nova's founder. I nodded. Not immediately, but I began the process. I spoke with my board, consulted with PR specialists, and prepared the legal groundwork. I'd been living a divided life for 5 years, Victor. That night, I decided I was done hiding my true self to make others, to make you, more comfortable. And the timing with the Harrington Solutions rejection? The partnership that would have saved my company? That was business, not personal, I said firmly. Nova rejected Harrington's proposal because Meridian offered superior terms and technology integration. The fact that the rejection coincided with my identity revelation was unfortunate timing. Victor studied me with newfound wariness. You expect me to believe there was no vindictive satisfaction in watching my company implode while you emerged, As a tech visionary? I met his gaze steadily. I won't pretend I didn't feel certain justice in the symmetry of it all. But destroying Harrington Solutions was never my goal. Your company was failing long before Nova rejected the partnership, a fact you might have recognized sooner if you'd been less focused on maintaining your image and more focused on innovation. The truth of my words hit him like a physical blow. For a moment, vulnerability cracked through his careful facade. I thought I was building something lasting, he said softly. Something that would be my legacy. We all did, I replied. The difference is that I actually built it, while you were coasting on past successes and industry connections. The harshness of my assessment hung between us. Victor's jaw tightened, but he didn't dispute my characterization. So where does that leave us? He asked finally. You've won. Nova is thriving. My company is dead. Our marriage is over. What now? I considered the question carefully. That depends on what you want, Victor. If you're looking for revenge or trying to salvage your pride, I suggest we complete our divorce quietly and go our separate ways. But if you asked me here because you genuinely want to understand what happened and perhaps learn from it, that's a different conversation. And if it's the latter? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Then I would say that your career isn't over unless you choose it to be. You're still the same intelligent, charismatic man I met 5 years ago. Your technical knowledge is sound, even if your management approach was flawed. Flawed enough that my wife built a competing company rather than partner with me, Victor noted with a bitter smile. I built Nova because the world needed better encryption solutions, and because I was tired of having my ideas dismissed by men who couldn't see past my gender, I corrected him. The fact that we became competitors was circumstantial, not intentional. Victor was silent for a long moment, turning his coffee cup slowly between his palms. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its defensive edge. The night we met, at that tech conference in Palo Alto, you challenged my presentation on encryption protocols. I was impressed by your insights, even though I didn't fully agree with them. A rueful smile crossed his face. Those were Nova's encryption approaches, weren't they? You were already developing them. I nodded. The early versions, yes. And when I offered you that junior analyst position at Harrington, it was insulting, I finished for him. I already had an MBA from Harvard and was running my own company. Victor winced. No wonder you turned it down. I thought it was because you weren't serious about a tech career. Which confirmed every assumption I'd made about how women are perceived in this industry, I said. You couldn't imagine that I might be overqualified for the position, only that I wasn't interested enough. Another silence fell between us, this one less tense than before. Around us, the cafe had filled with the late-morning crowd, providing a buffer of ambient noise that made our conversation feel more private. I've been doing a lot of thinking this past week, Victor finally said, about how I saw you, or rather how I failed to see you. It's been educational. In what way? I asked cautiously. I've had to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself, about how I've treated women in my professional life, about the talent I've probably overlooked because of my biases. He met my gaze directly. I'm not asking for forgiveness or a second chance, but I am sorry, Ellie. Not just for how I treated you, but for who I was. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. I had expected defensiveness, perhaps even hostility, but not this quiet acknowledgement of failure. Thank you for saying that, I replied simply. Victor took a deep breath. So, Tetrasek, should I take the position? I considered the question. It's a step down from the CEO, certainly, but it would keep you in the industry while you regroup. The question is whether you're willing to set aside your ego long enough to learn from the experience. And if I am? I found myself smiling slightly. Then it might be exactly what you need. Tetrasek has solid fundamentals but dated approaches. They could benefit from someone with vision, assuming that someone has learned to listen to other perspectives. Victor nodded slowly. Including female perspectives? Especially those, I agreed. Their security team has several brilliant women who've been consistently overlooked for promotion. That might be where you could start making changes. For the first time since he'd arrived, Victor's expression lightened somewhat. You've researched Tetrasec's internal structure. I shrugged. Know your industry. That includes potential competitors and their organizational weaknesses. A lesson I obviously failed to learn, Victor acknowledged. He hesitated before adding, which brings me to the real reason I asked to meet with you today. I tensed slightly. Which is? I want to know if you'd be willing to provide a reference for me with Tetrasec's board. He held up a hand as I started to respond. Not as my wife, or even as a friend. As the founder and CEO of Nova Technologies, a recognized innovator in the field. Your endorsement would carry significant weight, especially now. The request stunned me. After everything that had happened, Victor was asking me to vouch for him professionally, implicitly acknowledging my superior position in the industry we both inhabited. Why would I do that? I asked, genuinely curious. Because despite everything, I think you're fair, Victor replied. You've always separated business from personal matters, something I'm only now learning to do. You know my technical capabilities, even if you've seen my management flaws firsthand. And, he hesitated. Perhaps because helping me rebuild some semblance of a career is better for both of us than watching me crash and burn completely. He wasn't wrong. A prolonged public downfall for Victor would inevitably splash back on me, raising questions about my own judgment and potentially casting a shadow over Nova's reputation. More pragmatically, having Victor employed at Tetrasec, a second-tier company that posed no competitive threat to Nova, was preferable to having him resurface at a direct competitor with a grudge to settle. I'll consider it, I said finally. Send me the contact information for their board chair. But Victor, I fixed him with a direct gaze. If I do this, it's a one-time professional courtesy, not the beginning of some ongoing connection between us. Understood, he said quickly. And the divorce proceedings? My lawyer will contact yours this week with a settlement proposal. I think you'll find it fair. I have no interest in dragging this out or punishing you financially. Victor looked surprised. Even though you could? What would be the point? I asked simply. I've built what I wanted to build. Nova is thriving. I can finally live as my complete self without hiding or diminishing my accomplishments. Taking. Your remaining assets would just be petty. A complicated expression crossed Victor's face, part relief, part chagrin, part something that might have been respected. You're a better person than I would be in your position, he admitted. It's not about being better, I corrected him. It's about focusing on what actually matters to me. And contrary to what you always believed, Victor, status symbols and social dominance were never what drove me. I wanted to create something meaningful, something that would change the world for the better. Now I can do that openly, without pretense. As our conversation wound down, I felt a strange sense of closure beginning to form. The anger and resentment that had built up over years of dismissal and diminishment hadn't disappeared, but they had lost some of their sharp edges. One last question, Victor said as we prepared to leave. If you could go back 5 years, knowing what you know now, would you still marry me? The question deserved honest consideration. Would I choose again the gilded cage that had simultaneously confined and protected me? Would I willingly endure the years of dismissal and diminishment, knowing they would eventually lead to this moment of vindication and freedom? No, I said finally. I would have found another way to build Nova without compromising my authentic self for so long. The cost was too high, not just for me, but for you too. I met his gaze directly. We could have been powerful allies instead of ending as cautionary tales for each other. Victor nodded slowly, accepting this truth without visible rancor. As we stood to leave, he extended his hand formally, a businesslike gesture that acknowledged our new reality. Good luck with Nova, Ellie. What you've built is remarkable, regardless of the circumstances. I shook his hand briefly. Good luck at Tetrasec, Victor. I hope you find what you're looking for there. We parted outside the cafe, heading in opposite directions down the sunlit street. As I walked toward my car, I felt lighter somehow, as if setting down a burden I'd carried for too long. The breaking point, that moment at the Women in Tech Gala when I'd finally decided enough was enough, had led not to destruction, but to liberation. For both of us, in different ways. My phone chimed with a message from Raj. Board meeting moved to 11 a.m. New partnership opportunity with the Department of Defense. Your input needed. I smiled, picking up my pace. The future was calling, and for the first time in 5 years, I could answer as my complete, undivided self. 6 months after the revelation that shook Silicon Valley, I stood at the podium of the Women in Tech Annual Gala, this time not as Victor Harrington's silent +1, but as the keynote speaker. The irony wasn't lost on me or the audience of over 500 industry leaders who filled the ornate ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel. 1 year ago, I sat at table 19 in this very room, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the hushed space. I listened as my then-husband accepted the Male Ally Award and explained to a room full of brilliant female engineers and founders that women's greatest contribution to tech was their emotional intelligence and social skills. A knowing ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, punctuated by a few scattered slow claps. At that moment, watching from the shadows as he reduced my value to household management, I made a decision that would change both our lives. I decided I was done hiding, done diminishing myself to make others comfortable, done being just a wife. The journey from that decision to this moment had been extraordinary, filled with challenges I couldn't have anticipated, and victories sweeter than I'd imagined. The media storm had been intense. For weeks, I couldn't open a browser or turn on a television without seeing my own face staring back at me, usually juxtaposed with Victor's in dramatic split-screen graphics. The headlines had evolved from sensationalist, "Tech wife's secret revenge destroys husband's empire," to more thoughtful analyses, "The Martinez Revelation, What It Tells Us About Gender Bias in Silicon Valley." I'd been portrayed alternately as a calculating manipulator, a feminist hero, and everything in between. The truth, as always, was more nuanced than any headline could capture. Nova Technologies had not just survived the media scrutiny, it had thrived. Our stock had doubled, new partnership opportunities emerged weekly, and our quantum encryption protocols were becoming the industry standard. The Department of Defense contract we'd secured last quarter was the largest in the company's history, providing secure communications infrastructure that would protect classified information for decades to come. The question I'm asked most frequently, I continued, scanning the attentive faces before me, is whether I regret maintaining my anonymity for so long. The answer is complex. I regret the necessity of it. I regret that our industry still places different values on identical ideas depending on the gender of the person presenting them, but I don't regret the clarity it gave me about the biases still entrenched in our field. In the front row, Diana and Raj nodded encouragingly. Beside them sat several former Harrington Solutions engineers who now formed the core of Nova's expanded quantum security division. We'd ultimately hired 23 of Victor's displaced employees, integrating their practical security experience with our cutting-edge encryption algorithms. My story has been framed as one of revenge, the brilliant wife who brought down her condescending husband's empire. But that narrative misses the point entirely. This was never about revenge. It was about refusing to be less than who I am, about creating something meaningful without being diminished in the process. As I spoke, I noticed a familiar figure slip quietly into the back of the ballroom. Victor, dressed in a conservative suit rather than his usual designer attire, took a seat near the exit. Our eyes met briefly across the distance, and he gave a small nod of acknowledgement. It was the first time I'd seen him in person since our meeting at Milo's Cafe 3 months earlier. True to my word, I had provided that professional reference to Tetrasek, and Victor had secured the advisory position. According to industry sources, he was focusing on cybersecurity education programs and mentoring junior engineers, particularly women, rather than claiming the spotlight. Our divorce had been finalized without acrimony, the settlement fair, enough that even the most scandal-hungry tech blogs had found little to speculate about. The legacy I hope to build isn't about one company or one technology breakthrough, I continued. It's about creating an industry where no one feels they need to hide their identity to have their work judged fairly, where just a wife, or just anything, isn't used as a diminishing qualifier, but recognized as one of many possible roles a complete, complex person might fill. I went on to announce the Nova Foundation's first major initiative, a $50 million commitment to scholarships and mentorship programs for women and minorities in STEM fields. The foundation would also provide seed funding for startups led by female founders, with a particular focus on those developing solutions for underserved communities. This is not charity, I emphasized. This is investment in untapped potential. It's recognition that brilliance doesn't conform to our biases about who looks like a founder or sounds like a CEO. It's acknowledging that the next quantum encryption breakthrough or artificial intelligence innovation might come from someone currently being told to stay in their lane or accept being just whatever role others have assigned them. The speech concluded to a standing ovation that felt both gratifying and humbling. As the applause faded and I moved into the crowd, I was surrounded by well-wishers, potential partners, and young women engineers eager to share their own stories of dismissal and perseverance. An hour into the reception, as I was discussing quantum key distribution with the CTO of a major healthcare system, I felt a presence at my elbow. Turning, I found myself face to face with Victor. The unexpected proximity created a momentary bubble of awkward silence amid the noisy gala. "Impressive speech," he said finally. "You always had a gift for clarity." "Thank you," I replied, studying him with curious detachment. He looked healthier than at our last meeting, the haunted expression gone from his eyes, replaced by something quieter, more reflective. "The Nova Foundation initiative is significant," he continued. $50 million is a serious commitment. "It's necessary," I replied simply. "The talent pipeline won't fix itself." He nodded, accepting this without argument. "Tetrasek is implementing some of Nova's protocols in their government security contracts," he offered. "Your team's work on quantum-resistant algorithms is revolutionary. I've been analyzing the public-facing components in my advisory capacity." "And?" I prompted, genuinely, curious about his technical assessment. "It's elegant," he admitted. "More sophisticated than anything Harrington Solutions was developing, even in our classified projects. You've pushed the field forward by years, maybe decades." The professional recognition from Victor, the man who had dismissed my technical understanding for our entire marriage, carried a particular weight that even the most prestigious industry awards had lacked. "How are you finding the advisory role?" I asked, shifting the focus from my accomplishments to his current situation. A small, self-deprecating smile crossed his face. "Humbling. Necessary." He hesitated before adding, "I'm learning to listen, more than I speak. Something I should have practiced years ago, particularly with you." Before I could respond, Diana appeared at my elbow. "Sorry to interrupt, but the Secretary of Commerce is eager to discuss the International Standards Committee with you. She's only got 10 minutes before her next engagement." I nodded, turning back to Victor. "Duty calls." "Of course." He stepped back, then paused. "Ellie? For what it's worth, I'm sorry I never saw you clearly. The loss was entirely mine. The simple sincerity of his statement caught me off guard. Thank you, Victor. That means something. As I moved away to meet with the secretary, I reflected on how dramatically our positions had reversed. The man who had once dismissed me as just a wife was now acknowledging my superior position in the industry we both inhabited. But there was no satisfaction in his diminishment, only a quiet recognition that both of us had been trapped by the roles we'd accepted, his as the brilliant, charismatic tech visionary, mine as the supportive, silent partner. Breaking free of those constraints had allowed us both, in different ways, to become more authentic versions of ourselves. Later that evening, after the gala concluded, I found myself standing on the rooftop terrace of Nova's headquarters, looking out at the San Francisco skyline. The city lights mirrored the stars above, creating the illusion of standing between two universes. Raj joined me, handing me a glass of champagne. To the most successful just a wife in Silicon Valley history, he toasted with gentle irony. Laughed, clinking my glass against his. I'm reclaiming the phrase. Maybe we should make it the title of my autobiography. Speaking of which, Raj said, the publisher called again. They've increased their offer for your memoir to 7 figures. They're particularly interested in the logistics of deception angle, how you maintained 2 separate identities for so long. I sipped my champagne, considering the proposal. My story had become something of a cultural touchstone, referenced in business schools, women's leadership seminars, and endless think pieces about gender bias in tech. A memoir would allow me to control the narrative, to emphasize the systemic issues rather than the personal drama. Tell them I'll consider it, I decided. But I want final editorial control, and a significant portion of the proceeds will go to scholarships for women in STEM. Raj nodded, making a note on his tablet. Also, the Nova Foundation board meeting is tomorrow at 10 a.m. We need to finalize the mentorship program parameters. I'll be there, I assured him. Have the legal team send over the updated grant criteria tonight so I can review them before the meeting. As Raj left, I remained on the terrace, reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months. The immediate chaos of the revelation had given way to a new normal, one where I no longer needed to compartmentalize my life or diminish my capabilities to make others comfortable. My phone chimed with a message from Lisa, my PR director. Wall Street Journal profile confirmed for next week. They want to focus on Nova's quantum applications and healthcare security. No personal questions promised. I smiled at the last line. After months of intense media scrutiny into my personal life, the focus was finally shifting back to where it belonged, the groundbreaking work Nova was doing in quantum encryption and security protocols. The following morning, as I prepared for the Foundation board meeting, I received an unexpected email. The subject line read simply, "Thank you." It was from Rebecca Chen, the same woman who had asked about my background at the previous year's Women in Tech Gala, the question Victor had intercepted with his dismissive comments about my dabbling in programming. Dear Ellie, I wanted to let you know that my daughter May, a computer science major at Berkeley, attended your speech last night. She's been following your story since the revelation 6 months ago, and your journey has become something of a North Star for her. Last semester, her professor told her that women aren't naturally suited for quantum computing and suggested she focus on UX design instead. She almost changed her major. Then, the Nova story broke, and she watched you on CNBC explaining quantum key distribution with more clarity than I've heard from anyone in 20 years in tech. She's staying in quantum computing, and she's applied for the Nova Foundation Scholarship program. Whatever happens with her application, I wanted you to know that your visibility matters. Your refusal to be just anything has already changed at least one young woman's trajectory. With gratitude, Rebecca Chen and I sat with the message for a long moment, feeling an unexpected tightness in my throat. This tangible impact on another woman's choices and opportunities mattered more than any stock price increase or industry award. Being just a wife had never been the sum of who I was. It had been a role I played, a mask I wore while building something meaningful in the shadows. Now, standing in the full light of public recognition, I could appreciate both the cost of that deception and the freedom of finally setting it aside. 2 weeks after the gala, I was scheduled to guest lecture at Stanford's Graduate School of Business. The amphitheater was packed, students lining the walls and sitting in the aisles to hear the woman whose story had become a Silicon Valley legend. Before I begin, I told them, I want to clarify something important. My journey is not a blueprint. I don't recommend spending years hiding your light or accepting dismissal as a strategy for success. I did what was necessary in a specific context, but the goal isn't to replicate my path. It's to create a world where such compromises aren't necessary. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. Do you think what happened with you and Harrington Solutions will change how women are treated in tech? I considered the question carefully. Change is rarely the result of a single event, no matter how dramatic. What the Nova revelation did was make visible what many already knew, but few discussed openly: that brilliant contributions are often overlooked because of who delivers them rather than their inherent value. I paused, then continued. Real change will come when we all recognize the talent we're wasting through our biases. When just a wife isn't a dismissal, but a recognition that someone might be many things simultaneously. A spouse? Yes. But perhaps also a quantum physicist, a CEO, or the person whose algorithm just revolutionized your industry. As the lecture concluded and students approached with questions and comments, I reflected on the term that had once been used to diminish me. Just a wife had been meant as a limitation, a reduction of my value to a supporting role in someone else's story. But I had reclaimed the narrative, transforming it from an insult into a powerful object lesson about underestimation and its consequences. The legacy of being called just a wife wasn't bitterness or vindication. It was the creation of a world where such dismissive categorization would become increasingly unthinkable, where talent and contribution would be recognized regardless of gender, and where the next generation of innovators could build their empires in the full light of day rather than in the shadows. Looking out at the sea of young faces, particularly the women who watched me with such intensity, I silently vowed to continue creating that world, one opportunity, one scholarship, one mentorship at a time. The price of being just a wife had been high, but the value of what had emerged from that crucible, both for me and for those who would come after, was immeasurable. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.